Omega was invisible to Alpha King, until Alpha King jealousy erupted and control was lost. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Damien King, the Alpha King, ruled with unmatched authority, his presence commanding respect, yet his eyes always seemed cold and distant. He was the heart of the kingdom, a force of nature, a ruler every alpha aspired to be. Yet, despite all the power at his fingertips, there was one thing he couldn't control, and that was Lily Monroe. Lily was an Omega, and in this world of alphas and Omegas were often seen as the weak, the overlooked, the ones who existed in the shadow of others. But Lily wasn't just any Omega. She was quiet, observant, and graceful in her own way, and despite Damien's complete disregard for her presence, she carried on with dignity. However, to Damien, she was invisible, a mere part of the background, her existence no more significant than the air he breathed. She moved about the palace without him giving her a second glance. Lily had long accepted that this was her place in the world, ignored, forgotten, and unnoticed by the Alpha King. But deep down, there was a part of her that yearned to be seen, to be acknowledged, and most importantly, to be valued. Yet, that was not something she could ever hope for under Damien's cold rule. While Lily remained out of sight, Damien, the king of the Alphas, carried on his duties with a singular focus. His mind was always occupied with matters of state, his eyes always scanning the room for threats or alliances. He wasn't concerned with the daily lives of the Omegas, nor did he care for their struggles. To him, they were nothing more than pawns in the grand scheme of things. The reality of their world was that Omegas were not meant to challenge the status quo, and Lily, with her quiet demeanor, fit perfectly into this mold. She knew her place, and that place was in the background, out of Damien's sight. But things were about to change. As the days went by, Lily's presence began to shift. She wasn't just blending into the background anymore. She had caught the attention of someone, though not in the way she had ever expected. This shift didn't go unnoticed by Damien. At first, it was subtle, a minor change that seemed insignificant to him. But as time passed, he found himself drawn to Lily in ways he couldn't explain. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was beautiful, with soft eyes and an almost ethereal grace. It was something more, something that gnawed at the edges of his mind. Why, after all this time, was he suddenly noticing her? And that, my friends, was the moment everything began to change. As the days passed, Damien found himself watching Lily more closely than he ever had before. It wasn't something he intended. It was something that just happened. He couldn't explain it, but there was a shift in his thoughts whenever she entered a room. There was an unusual stillness about her, a quiet grace that seemed to captivate the attention of those around her, though they too never truly noticed her presence. But Damien did. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, and it was almost as if she existed outside the typical world of an Omega. He started to observe the way she spoke to others, how she carried herself with a quiet confidence, and the subtle strength that radiated from her. For the first time, Damien was aware of her, of Lily Monroe, the Omega he had always overlooked. He was confused by his own reactions. Why did she suddenly seem so important? Why, after all these years of indifference, was he suddenly interested in someone he once considered insignificant? The answer, though unclear, lingered at the back of his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. One afternoon, while he was in the grand hall, Damien caught sight of Lily standing near the large windows, gazing out at the kingdom below. The golden sunlight illuminated her features, casting a soft glow that made her seem almost otherworldly. For a brief moment, Damien found himself frozen, watching her from a distance. There was something in the way she stood, so calm, yet so full of silent determination. He blinked, his mind racing to understand what was happening. His usual sense of control was slipping, something he had never allowed to happen before. Why does she look so different, he thought to himself. But he quickly dismissed the thought. He had more important matters to deal with. Still, The image of Lily lingered in his mind long after the moment had passed. He couldn't stop thinking about her, and it disturbed him. It wasn't that he had ever been interested in her romantically before, far from it, but there was something about her now that made him question everything he thought he knew. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Damien found it harder to ignore his growing curiosity about Lily. He watched her from across the room, during meetings, during the quiet moments when everyone else was busy with their own tasks. He caught himself looking for her, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Omega who seemed to have suddenly taken hold of his attention in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't like him. He was the Alpha King, after all. His focus had always been on power, on maintaining control, and on ensuring that the kingdom ran smoothly. Yet here he was, distracted by someone he had never once considered a threat. Or perhaps, that was exactly the problem. Lily wasn't a threat to his kingdom, but she had become a threat to his control. The more he watched her, the more his feelings began to change. And with those feelings came an unsettling realization. He couldn't ignore her any longer. But was it too late to change things between them? Was it possible for someone like Damien, who had always been so detached, to suddenly become invested in an Omega like Lily? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. Everything was about to change between them. As days passed, Damien found himself wrestling with thoughts he could not control. Every time he saw Lily, that strange sensation of discomfort in his chest grew stronger. He had been the Alpha King for so long, so focused on his duties that he never allowed himself to consider the feelings of those around him, especially not an Omega. Yet here he was, unable to shake the image of her, her quiet grace, her soft but undeniable presence that seemed to stir something deep inside him. Damien knew that he couldn't keep ignoring her, not anymore. One afternoon, he summoned her to his chambers for a rare personal meeting. He wasn't sure what he expected, but as Lily entered, her usual calm demeanor only seemed to deepen his confusion. She was, as always, poised, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Lily," Damien began, his voice more uncertain than he intended. "I've been noticing something about you. You seem different." Lily stood still for a moment, her eyes meeting his, but she said nothing. She had long grown accustomed to his indifference, so this sudden attention, this strange recognition, was a shock. "I don't understand," she said carefully, not wanting to offend him. "Different how, Your Majesty?" Damien took a breath, unsure how to explain the inexplicable shift he felt in his own heart. "You've become more visible. To me, I mean. More present. I never noticed before, but now, I can't seem to ignore you." Her eyes widened ever so slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise with a quiet nod. "I've always been here, Your Majesty," she said softly. "But perhaps it's you who've changed." Damien was taken aback by her response. He had expected some form of submission, a quiet acceptance of his authority, but instead, Lily seemed to speak with a calm confidence he had never expected from her. It was as if she knew exactly what was happening, as if she had always understood something about him that he had not yet realized. "Why now?" he asked, his voice growing more intense, though he didn't know why. "Why do you suddenly matter to me?" Lily's gaze softened, but her voice remained steady. "I have always mattered, Your Majesty. Perhaps you just didn't see it." Damien couldn't deny the truth in her words. There had been something about Lily, something he had overlooked, something that now seemed so painfully clear. She wasn't just an Omega. She was someone he had never truly understood, and now he was beginning to wonder if he ever would. The tension between them was palpable, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Damien was lost in thought, but Lily seemed at peace with the silence. She had known this moment would come, though perhaps not in the way she had imagined. "I've spent so many years thinking I was invisible," Lily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But maybe that was my mistake. I never realized that sometimes, it's not about being seen. It's about being understood." Damien's mind raced. Could it be that the change he was feeling wasn't just about his growing curiosity, but something deeper? Was there something in him that had been missing all along? As the silence stretched on, Damien's resolve began to crack. He had never allowed anyone to make him question his control, but Lily was different. He wasn't sure what it meant yet, but one thing was clear, his world was shifting, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure how to handle it. The days that followed were filled with an unexpected tension. Damien, the Alpha King, found himself wrestling with his thoughts every moment. What had begun as a simple curiosity had now grown into something much more complex. Every time he saw Lily, every time their paths crossed, something inside him stirred. An emotion he couldn't explain, a reaction he couldn't control. He tried to shake it off, to return to his duties, to focus on the responsibilities that weighed so heavily on his shoulders. But the more he tried to ignore it, the more he realized it was becoming impossible to do so. Lily was no longer just a background presence in his life. She was there, in his thoughts, in his actions, and there was no escaping it. One evening, as the castle fell into a quiet stillness, Damien stood by the window, staring out over the kingdom. The golden glow of the setting sun reflected off the distant mountains, and for a moment, he found himself lost in the view. But his thoughts quickly drifted back to Lily. It had been nearly a week since their conversation in his chambers, and yet, it felt like no time had passed at all. What had changed? Why did he feel so unsettled? He ran his hand through his hair, frustrated by his own confusion. As if on cue, a soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," Damien called, his voice quieter than usual. The door opened, and there she was, Lily, standing at the threshold, as poised and composed as ever. For a moment, the sight of her took him by surprise, but then he remembered the conversation they had shared. She seemed more confident now, more self-assured. And yet, there was still that same air of mystery around her that he couldn't quite unravel. "Your Majesty," Lily said, her voice soft but steady. "I hope I am not disturbing you." Damien glanced at her, his eyes lingering a bit longer than he intended. "No, you're not disturbing me," he said, though his words felt distant, as if his mind were elsewhere. "What brings you here?" Lily hesitated for a moment, as if carefully choosing her words. "I wanted to speak with you again," she said, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "I know we've both been trying to understand the changes between us, and I think it's time we spoke honestly." Damien's heart skipped a beat at her words. He had sensed it, too, the shift in their dynamic. But he had been too proud to acknowledge it, too unsure of how to deal with it. "Go on," he said, his voice now softer, a hint of curiosity in his tone. Lily took a deep breath, then stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "I think I understand now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What you're feeling, it's not just curiosity. It's something more. And I know that because I'm feeling it too." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Damien stared at her, the reality of her statement sinking in. He hadn't expected her to say something like that, to acknowledge the strange connection they had been dancing around for so long. For a moment, the room was silent, both of them standing there, caught in a shared understanding that neither of them knew how to handle. Damien's mind raced, but his heart beat louder. This was more than just a shift in their relationship. This was something deeper, something neither of them had been prepared for. Lily's presence, once unnoticed, had now become impossible to ignore. And Damien realized, with a shock that hit him like a wave, that it wasn't just Lily who had changed. It was him too. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension as they stood there in the quiet of Damien's chambers. Lily's words lingered in his mind, replaying over and over again, echoing in the silence. She had admitted it. She felt it too. That strange, undeniable connection that neither of them could explain. The fact that Lily, the Omega he had once dismissed, now stood before him, acknowledging something he had been trying so hard to ignore, left him feeling unmoored. His usual sense of control, the very thing that had always defined him, seemed to be slipping further away with every passing moment. You feel it too?" Damien's voice was barely above a whisper, almost as if he were afraid to hear the answer. Lily nodded, her gaze steady but filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "I do," she said simply. "I don't fully understand it, but I know what I feel." Damien stared at her, unsure of how to respond. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and doubt. For so long, he had been the one in control, the one who held the power, but now, in this moment, he realized how little control he had over his own emotions. He had built a life around the certainty of his position, the stability of his authority, but now it all felt fragile. Lily, the Omega who had once been invisible to him, had become the most important person in his world. And it terrified him. He was supposed to be the Alpha King, a figure of absolute strength and control. And yet, standing here with Lily, he felt anything but that. For the first time in years, he questioned everything he thought he knew about himself, about power, about what it meant to truly connect with another person. The silence between them stretched on, and Lily, sensing his inner turmoil, took a small step closer. She didn't speak, but her presence was enough. There was something in the way she looked at him, something that told him she understood. She understood the weight of what he was feeling, even if he couldn't fully make sense of it himself. Damien took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. Lily, I don't know what this means, he admitted, his voice cracking slightly as he spoke. I've spent so much of my life pretending I have everything under control. But now, I don't know anymore. Lily's expression softened, and she reached out, her hand hovering just inches from his. It was a small gesture, but it meant more than words could express. It's okay, she said gently. You don't have to have all the answers right now. We both don't know where this is going, but we don't have to figure it out all at once. Damien looked at her, her words sinking in. He had spent so many years pushing people away, isolating himself in his position as Alpha King. But here was Lily, offering him a quiet understanding that he had never expected. And for the first time, he realized that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to not have all the answers. The world he had built, the walls he had carefully constructed around his heart, had always been his way of protecting himself. But now, standing here with Lily, he couldn't help but wonder if it was time to let those walls down. Perhaps, for the first time in his life, Damien could let someone in. Maybe this was the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but both of them now realized they needed. He didn't have all the answers. But as he looked at Lily, something inside him shifted, a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, the future was not as uncertain as he had once thought. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Damien found himself increasingly drawn to Lily. It was no longer just a matter of curiosity. It was something deeper, something undeniable. The more he spent time in her presence, the more he realized how much he had been missing. What had started as a slow shift in his thoughts had now become a constant presence in his mind. He couldn't escape it, not that he wanted to anymore. He knew he was on the verge of something life-changing, something he had never imagined for himself. But as much as he felt this pull toward her, he was still hesitant. The weight of his position, the responsibilities he carried as Alpha King, were ever present in his thoughts. Could he afford to let go of his control? Could he allow himself to experience something so vulnerable? He wasn't sure. But one thing was clear. He couldn't ignore Lily any longer. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Damien found himself wandering the palace halls, his thoughts consumed by Lily. He knew he had to speak to her again, to confront what was happening between them. He couldn't pretend that everything was fine, that nothing had changed, because it had. And deep down, he knew. He couldn't go back. As he approached the garden, he spotted Lily standing by the fountain, her figure bathed in the soft light of the evening. She looked serene, almost as if the world around her had faded into the background. He hesitated for a moment, watching her, before finally stepping forward. Lily turned at the sound of his footsteps, her eyes meeting his. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. There was a silence between them, one that spoke volumes, as if they both knew exactly what was happening, but neither of them knew how to address it. Lily, Damien said softly, his voice breaking the silence. I've been thinking about everything. About you, about us. She met his gaze with a quiet intensity, as if she had been waiting for him to say something. And, she asked, her voice calm, but with an undercurrent of anticipation. Damien took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. And I can't ignore this anymore. I can't keep pretending that I don't feel this pull toward you. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Damien felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he never had before. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, the one who held all the power. But in this moment, standing before Lily, he realized how little control he had over his own heart. Lily's expression softened, and she took a step closer to him. You don't have to explain, Damien, she said gently. I feel it too. I've always felt it, even when I didn't understand it. Damien's heart raced at her words, and he took another step closer, as if drawn to her by an invisible force. The space between them was closing, and neither of them seemed willing to stop it. As their eyes locked, the world around them seemed to fade away. There was only the two of them, standing in the quiet garden, caught in a moment that neither of them could have predicted. For the first time in a long time, Damien felt like he wasn't alone. And for the first time, he realized that maybe he didn't need to be the one in control all the time. Maybe, just maybe, he could allow himself to feel, truly feel, for the first time in his life. The following days were filled with a new sense of awareness. Damien could no longer deny the connection between him and Lily. It wasn't just a fleeting moment, something to be forgotten with time. It was something more, something deep and undeniable. Every time he saw her, something in his chest tightened, and he could no longer pretend it wasn't there. The weight of his responsibilities as Alpha King remained, but there was a new force pulling at him, a force he couldn't understand but couldn't ignore. He found himself seeking Lily's company more and more, stealing moments where he could simply be with her, to feel what it was like to let go, even just for a moment. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the palace grounds, Damien stood in the courtyard, waiting for her. He had asked her to meet him there, not knowing exactly what he would say, only that he needed to be near her. When she arrived, she greeted him with a soft smile, her eyes reflecting a quiet understanding. "You asked to see me?" Lily's voice was calm, but Damien could hear the curiosity in it. He nodded, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Yes, there's something I've been thinking about," he began, his words slow as if carefully choosing each one. "I've spent so much of my life focused on my position, my duty, my control. I thought I had everything figured out, that I knew what I wanted. But now, I don't know anymore." Lily didn't speak at first, letting him gather his thoughts. She could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the vulnerability that he was trying to hide. Damien had always been strong, a leader others looked to for guidance, but now, in this moment, he seemed unsure. And that, more than anything, made Lily's heart ache. "Damien," she said softly, stepping closer to him. "You don't have to have all the answers. Not right now. I don't have them either." Her words were simple, but they carried so much weight. It was as if she was giving him permission to let go of the pressure he had always carried. For a brief moment, Damien allowed himself to truly feel the relief in her words. He didn't have to be the perfect king, the perfect leader. He didn't have to have it all figured out. He only had to be himself. "I don't know how to navigate this," he confessed, his voice quieter now. "How do I let go of everything I've known? How do I move forward with this, with us?" Lily smiled gently, her hand reaching out to lightly touch his. "You don't have to have all the answers," she repeated. "You just have to trust yourself. Trust me, and trust that whatever happens, we'll face it together." There was a softness in her voice, an unwavering certainty that filled the space between them. Damien looked down at her hand in his, the connection between them feeling stronger than ever. He had always been the one in control, but for the first time, he realized that sometimes, the strength to move forward came not from holding on, but from letting go. In that moment, everything seemed to shift. The kingdom, the throne, the endless expectations. None of it mattered as much as the woman standing before him, offering him something he had never allowed himself to receive: acceptance, understanding, and the promise of something more. The tension between them seemed to melt away, replaced by something new, something that felt like hope. It was a quiet kind of power, a force that didn't demand control, but instead invited connection. Damien squeezed her hand gently, a small but significant gesture. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But I know that I want to face it with you." The days that followed were filled with a quiet, undeniable shift. Damien and Lily had taken the first steps towards something new, something neither of them could have predicted. They no longer merely shared the same space, but something more, something deeper had begun to grow between them. There was a subtle intimacy in the way they spoke, in the way their eyes met across a room, in the quiet moments when no words were needed. It was as if, for the first time, Damien was truly seen, not as the Alpha King, not as the ruler of a kingdom, but simply as a man who was allowed to feel. But despite this new sense of connection, a part of him still struggled. He had lived so long under the weight of expectations, under the constant pressure to be perfect, to be strong, to always know the right path forward. And now, for the first time, he realized that it was okay to not have all the answers. Lily, in her quiet way, had shown him that it was okay to let go, to let someone in. One evening, as they stood together on the balcony overlooking the vast kingdom, the weight of the stars above them felt almost symbolic. The night sky, vast and unending, mirrored the uncertainty that still lingered in Damien's heart. But it also felt full of possibility. The world, so vast, was no longer something he needed to control, something he needed to conquer. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Damien asked, his voice low, thoughtful. He wasn't sure if he was asking about the kingdom or about them, but the question felt important. Lily stood beside him, looking out into the distance, her expression calm but full of depth. "I think about it all the time," she said softly, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. "But I don't think we need to have all the answers right now. Sometimes, it's enough to just be present, to just be here." Her words were a balm to his soul. They gave him a peace he hadn't realized he needed. In that moment, Damien allowed himself to feel the truth of what she was saying. For so long, he had been trapped by the idea that he had to control everything, that he had to have a plan for every aspect of his life. But with Lily, he was beginning to understand that sometimes, not knowing was okay. They didn't need a roadmap for what came next. They didn't need to predict every twist and turn. All they had was the present, and in that moment, the present was enough. "You've taught me something," Damien said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. "I've spent my whole life thinking that I had to have control over everything. But now, I see that maybe it's okay to let go." Lily turned toward him, a small but knowing smile on her lips. "It's not about letting go of everything," she said softly. "It's about letting go of the need to control everything. There's a difference." Damien felt the weight of her words sink in, and for the first time, he realized how true they were. He didn't need to control every outcome. He didn't need to micromanage every decision. What he needed, what they both needed, was trust. Trust in each other, trust in the future, and trust that whatever came next, they would face it together. "I'm ready to face whatever comes," Damien said, his voice steady, filled with newfound resolve. Lily nodded, her eyes meeting his with a quiet understanding. "So am I," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. And in that moment, they both knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side, together. As weeks passed, Damien and Lily's relationship continued to evolve, marked by subtle changes that neither of them could fully understand, but both felt deeply. There was an ease now, a comfort that existed between them, as if the weight of their previous uncertainty had melted away. The kingdom continued to thrive under Damien's rule, but now, there was a new softness in his decisions, a new approach to leadership that was grounded not just in strength, but in trust and compassion. He had once believed that control was the key to maintaining order, but now he saw that sometimes, letting go was the key to true strength. Lily's presence in his life had taught him that. In the quiet moments they shared, whether it was over a meal or a simple conversation in the gardens, Damien felt something he had never experienced before: peace. The need to constantly be on guard, to be the perfect ruler, slowly began to fade. He was learning to trust, not just in the future, but in the people around him. He was learning to trust Lily. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of purple and gold, Damien stood at the balcony overlooking the palace grounds, his gaze lost in the view. Lily joined him, her presence a calming force beside him. They had come a long way from the cold distance that had once defined their interactions. The air between them now felt natural, as if it had always been meant to be this way. "Do you ever think about what life will be like when everything settles?" Lily asked, her voice soft, but carrying a sense of curiosity that mirrored his own. "Sometimes," Damien replied, his voice thoughtful. "But I think I've spent so much time worrying about what comes next that I forgot to enjoy what I have now." He glanced at her, his eyes meeting hers with a newfound warmth. "I think that's something you've taught me." Lily smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. She had always believed in the quiet power of the present, in embracing the now rather than constantly reaching for what was just out of reach. And now, it seemed, Damien was beginning to understand that as well. I've learned from you too, she said softly. You've taught me what it means to trust. To trust in the future, in each other. They stood there in the fading light, the world around them seeming to slow down as they shared this moment. Damien could feel the weight of his past, the expectations, the pressure, beginning to lift. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just living for the future, for the next step, for the next challenge. He was living for the moment, for the quiet understanding they shared. And in that moment, he realized something important. He didn't need to control everything. He didn't need to have all the answers. What he needed was the courage to move forward, to trust in himself, and in the person standing beside him. Whatever happens next, Damien said, his voice steady and calm, I'm ready to face it. With you. Lily's eyes met his, her heart full of hope. And I'm ready too, she whispered. And in that quiet moment, they both knew that no matter what challenges awaited them, they would face them together, side by side, with trust, love, and a bond stronger than anything they had ever imagined.